Wow. Can you believe these sick Catholics actually claim that the pedophile scandal is behind them? I guarantee you there's more cases to come.
Are there shared values talking about promoting religious freedom, human rights, and fighting extremism? Now, the Pope, for his public remarks, he did not specifically address any of those hot-button issues like Iraq or abortion or the church abuse scandal. But again, we're waiting to hear what did happen in that private meeting.
All right, thank you so very much, Jeannie, for the update. Again, this is a live picture of Pope Benedict making his way from his meeting at the White House with the president. And to get more insight on what could have happened in that private meeting, we're joined by George Weigel, an NBC analyst and author of Witness to Hope, Pope John Paul's biography. So, George, obviously living under the shadow of John Paul II, incredible, but do you believe that Pope Benedict stepped up and gave the American people perhaps what they were craving to see?
I think this Pope has done a marvelous job in about 15 minutes of introducing himself to the people of the United States by speaking of the values that are at the core of the American experience: the dignity of the human person, religious freedom, charitable activity, respect for others. And I think those concerns are what create the parallel interests of the United States and the Vatican in world politics. The Vatican doesn't engage the diplomatic world just like any other state. It's a moral actor. The Pope is a voice of moral persuasion. And so whether the issue is combating trafficking in persons or securing a stable Iraq safe for pluralism, or a transition in Cuba, which I expect was on the conversational agenda today, in which that suffering country can begin to enjoy the fruits of a freedom it has been denied for many decades. It's all of a piece with this Pope's respect for the fundamental moral truths on which the American democratic experiment rests.
And George, you point out the remarks given by the Pope, very brief, and some have wondered if during that speech today he would take on some heavy issues like abortion, like gay marriage or homosexuality, and of course the war in Iraq. Did you expect him to, at that point in time, address those issues?
No, I think the Pope understood that this was an occasion, this was a moment to introduce himself as a man to the American people, and a man with a great respect for the United States. Let me say something on this Iraq question, because I think there's a lot of confusion on this. We are not in 2003 anymore. This is 2008. The disagreement of 2003 was there. It's now past, and both the United States and the Holy See are on the same page in seeking a stable democratic Iraq that's safe for pluralism. By speaking about the dignity of the human person as the foundation of American democracy, the Pope is, of course, touching on the root of Catholic thinking about abortion, the nature of marriage and the family, etc. But this is not a Pope who has come to America to inject himself into our political debates. He's a Pope who's come to remind us of the moral truths that ought to shape those debates.
Let me ask you this, then outside of those issues, we heard, George, yesterday the Pope talk about the church, or at least him being deeply ashamed of the sex abuse scandal that rocked the church, involving 5,000 priests, costing the church billions of dollars, millions of dollars in settlement money. He took the time yesterday to address that. He's now expected to speak to 350 bishops. What do you anticipate, if any more, the Pope will say at least about that issue affecting so many, and in fact some attribute it to the decline in the number of people going to Mass?
Well, the decline has been in specific places like Boston, which was the epicenter of this crisis. Most of the Catholic Church in the United States has turned the page on this. The Church is living the reforms that were put in place since the awful year of 2002. The Pope is going to challenge the bishops to be more effective teachers of Catholic faith and truth, because this crisis was fundamentally a crisis of failure to live the truths of Catholic faith, which most certainly do not include the sexual abuse of the young. So the challenge to the bishops is going to be to do their job more effectively as pastors and teachers. I expect the Pope is also going to come back to this topic in his homily at Nationals Park here in Washington tomorrow and at Yankee Stadium on Sunday, making clear to everyone that it is no part of the life and practice of the Catholic Church to tolerate the abuse of the young, and that we have put behind us, through reforms in seminaries, through the reform of life that is necessary to live chastity successfully and prayerfully. We have put behind us a moment of which we are all ashamed, but from which we have learned some important truths. We've been reminded of some important truths, I should say, about how it is that priests and bishops should conduct themselves.
All right, George, thank you for your insight. I'm going to bring it back to the studio here. I've got Monsignor Thomas McSweeney. He's an MSNBC analyst and expert on the papacy, and Father Gil Martinez. He's with the Church of St. Paul the Apostle in New York. So, Monsignor, short speech, as George pointed out, 15 minutes, but a lot was said. I know you were impressed with what you heard from
Certainly, he was pointing the arrows right to that UN speech, to be sure. He was setting a stage for a really, I'm sure, a delightful conversation about American democracy with President Bush. He's setting the stage for a serious conversation about our fundamental moral values as it touches upon the issues of that sexual abuse scandal. That wound is still there, and the Pope is still very sensitive to how it rocked the whole Church, albeit just a few individual priests who were involved in that activity. I think there's going to be a wonderful candor on that, but as he said so clearly here in setting the stage, I think, for all of his future remarks, this country has wonderful rock-bed values that are built on faith, and we recognize that, and he's going to encourage us to lift those values up into our public action, bring them into the public sphere as responsible citizens.
Father